Thank you for joining Wars of the Rosies as we continue with part 7, the Beatitudes, from the Mystical Christ by Manly P. Hall. The Christian Mystery in the Human Heart. Chapter 7, the Beatitudes. The Sermon on the Mount is given in St. Matthew 5 through 7. The sermon opens with 9 declarations, beginning with the words, "Blessed are." These declarations are called the Beatitudes, or blessed statements. Most of the teachings given by Jesus on this occasion is derived from the Old Testament, but cannot be considered as exclusively Jewish in origin. Doctrinal parallels may be found in most of the religions of the East and in the ethical codes of the philosophical systems of the Greeks and Egyptians. The moral instructions of the Master did not conflict with the Jewish law. St. Clement, 1st century AD, who is said to have been the first of the Apostolic Fathers, and a disciple of St. Peter, says in the Recognitions, "Between us who believe in Jesus and the Jews who do not believe on him, there is no difference except as to whether this Jesus is the prophet whom Moses foretold. The universal distribution of certain basic spiritual convictions justifies the belief that these convictions are sustained by human experience and are not dependent upon the authority of inspired religious leaders. History reveals the effects of conduct and moral codes upon the essential well-being of individuals and groups. The teachings set forth in the Beatitudes constitute an enlightened policy for living. It would be no exaggeration to say that this is the most practical outline of immutable principles yet discovered by mankind. In spite, however, of inspired authority and human experience, these beautiful instructions have never been permitted to dominate or guide the management of mundane affairs. Though honored and respected, they have not been applied in those times or upon those occasions when they would have been most useful. Strong men are seldom moved by gentle motives, and we have depended upon strength rather than upon integrity for leadership. Optimism and ambition have formed and reformed nations, and have established precedents which later inspired the multitude. We remain convinced that the way of heaven is apart from the way of earth, and that these extremes cannot meet on common ground. If the human destiny could be completed in the material sphere, we might be justified in our program of so-called realism. But man comes from the unknown, lingers for a time in this vale of uncertainty, and returns to the unknown. He is here for a little while, and elsewhere for an incalculable period of time. No concept of life which does not consider the elsewhere condition of human consciousness can be sufficient or satisfactory, even though we may ultimately integrate the material sphere of our living and attain a utopian social system. We have accomplished only in part. The person must achieve a security which cannot be considered by the state of his world. Theoretically, at least, man can perfect society because he is the dynamic agent, but society cannot perfect man. Great legal codes, like those of Hammurabi and Justinian, were devised originally to protect and advance those ethical convictions, the practical value of which was already evident and demonstrable. The overtones of these codes are now known as laws inequality, principles of justice which transcends the formal interpretation of statutes and regulations. Law is fulfilled in justice, as learning is fulfilled in understanding. Laws are made by men, but justice is administered by divine agency. Thus, justice from the heart tempers with mercy the severities of legal procedure. The spirit conquers the letter to the degree that consciousness ennobles intellect. The Beatitudes emphasize the very virtues we are least inclined to cultivate. We cannot keep this code and achieve this brittle success which passes as sophistication. As we read these declarations, we may resent the spirit of humanity, kindness and renunciation which pervades the Sermon on the Mount. If we live these teachings of Jesus faithfully and lovingly, we may appear weak and insignificant in the eyes of our contemporaries. When foolishness is fashionable, unfoolishness is penalized. A decision must be made. What is more important to us? That we shall be admired by the foolish, knowing in our hearts that we are not admirable? Or shall we keep faith with ourselves? All honorable religious systems require that the individual make his own choice, weighing all things and clinging to that which is good. It is this honest selection which bestows the courage to keep faith with the divine plan. When mysteries of the Spirit are restricted by words, the words themselves cannot be accepted literally. We must seek those overtones which letters and syllables imprison within their lines and characters. We may read the words with our eyes or hear them with our ears, but we must understand them with our hearts and experience them as mysteries of consciousness with the power of the soul. Popular usage often obscures the meanings of familiar terms, impelling us to accept common definitions. In religious practices, we have disfigured nearly all the sayings of the Illumined. We have tried to reduce the mystical content of teaching so that they justify prevailing opinions. As a result, we have lost the keys to the scriptures and have made other keys which will not fit the lock. Jesus ascended into a mountain and seated himself. His disciples gathered about him, and he taught them, and his words were simple and beautiful with the wisdom of the Spirit. And he said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." This has been interpreted to mean that the poor in spirit are the meek. But such a reading is unlikely, as meekness is referred to directly in the third beatitude, according to the Talmud. Wherever the greatness of God is mentioned in the scriptures, the love of God for the humble is spoken of. Humility implies freedom from intellectual pride, and, by extension, the recognition of human dependence upon divine strength. The way of God is from faith in self-knowing to faith in God-knowing. We all have a sense of self-importance. It is not necessarily egotism, but it is certainly egoism. We believe in the paramount significance of ourselves as persons. Our opinions are important. The attitudes which we have developed through the uncertain processes of trial and error have peculiar merits. We are empowered by our mind with the authority to dominate lives, our own and others. We seldom question or doubt these accumulated prerogatives. We are born to be obeyed and to exert influence. Those who resist or resent stand self-convicted before our mind. By this procedure alone, fallacies are perpetuated, and the natural growth of others is impeded. The mystic, as he approaches the veil of his inner temple, becomes more aware that in the presence of God, the wisdom of men appears as foolishness. We can experience much and learn little because we do not accept the honorable testimony of events. In these days, we are overly impressed by the pronouncement of human authority. As we are so influenced, we desire to influence others. If our spirits are proud, we wish to be honored and obeyed. But if our spirits are humble, we long to honor and obey the sovereignty of good. It seems to me that the poor in spirit are those who have renounced the driving force of personal determinism, and are therefore ready to receive into their souls the kingdom of heaven. The Chinese have a saying that a man moved by his own mind wanders in darkness, but the sage finds the light when he permits himself to be moved by heaven. Thus the rich in opinion are the self-moved, and the poor in spirit are the heaven-moved. No wealth can be more burdensome than a mass of treasured opinions. By these we create philosophies, fashion theologies, reform institutions, and generously offend each other. In the end, we must have more opinions to remedy the disasters of those already enforced. Convinced that we are strong enough to manage our own affairs, we mismanage them with a good hope and shift the blame for failure to an ungrateful humankind. Fearing that we are misunderstood, we misunderstand the laws by which we live, transforming them into the laws by which we die. There is no place for truth in minds and hearts that are satisfied with their own ignorance. Only when the human way ends in tragedy do we awaken to our own shortcomings. In that moment we are the poor in spirit, for we have accepted and recognized our spiritual poverty. Even the religious-minded must recover from the illusion of theology before they can admit that doctrines can be false riches, making the mind to be proud. The second beatitude reads, "Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted." This cannot mean that unhappiness and sorrow are in themselves to be cultivated as spiritual virtues. Psalms 51:17 explains the difficulty. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. O God, thou wilt not despise. It is evident to all of us that in our days of success, we are not inclined to cultivate the powers of the soul. We turn to religion for help when we are no longer able to sustain ourselves by other means. It seems, therefore, that pain and grief break through the artificial barriers of worldliness and bring us back to eternal verities. Sickness has proven to be an orienting agent in numerous cases. When the body is afflicted with pain, we are no longer concerned with our artificial ambitions. Fearing the worst, we take stock of our own natures and seek inwardly for consolation. The same holds good in the policies of nations. Powerful and dominant states are not inclined to represent weaker peoples, nor examine the programs by which they seek to advance their spheres of influence. Gradually, power is taken from the oppressor and given to the oppressed. Success is the heaviest responsibility that man must bear. Only the truly great can succeed without arrogance and remain humble in the presence of adulation. We improve only when our present courses are inadequate. If, for a moment, we feel that we are secure, we close our minds to learning and our hearts to charitable deeds. This beatitude emphasizes the wonderful sense of divine presence that abides with those who seek God in their grief. They are indeed blessed, for they come into the presence of the eternal love. When disaster strikes a community, men forget their private grievances and serve friend and stranger alike. Every door is open to the needy, and all our resources can be instantly commanded. If we are autocratic in pleasure, we are democratic in pain. After the crisis has passed, we return again to the service of self-interest. We conspire against those who we previously assisted. Fraternity gives way to the old accustomed competitiveness, and the spirit of service departs from the environment. To mourn is to sorrow over loss of some kind. We grieve when loved ones are taken from us. We are profoundly moved by great calamities that bring misery to others of our kind. In time of war, we pray for peace, and we ask that the spirit of understanding shall fill our own heart and bring consolation to all hearts that are afflicted. We seem to know that only the Spirit can work the wonder of internal peace. What we cannot give of ourselves, we ask of a power greater than ourselves. When we mourn, the divine presence is intimately known, and its consolation immediately felt. It is not the adversity for which we should be grateful, but the testimony which comes through adversity. Perhaps we are more sensitive to internal guidance when the barriers and obstacles of pride and selfishness are temporarily removed. Consider psychologically. Grief lowers the resistance of the mind, for it is an experience that cannot be rationalized. Even while we mourn, we know that we are in the presence of values which cannot be changed by sorrow. The instinct, however, to express ourselves makes grieving an internal emotion drawn forth as a response to some outer circumstance. The quality of our grieving and the relative importance of the objects of our sorrow tell their story about us. A sincere sadness about some unhappy event may be an honorable statement of our own integrity. We seek not to gain, but to give, not to possess, but to release. If the emotion is sincere, it carries with it subtle statements of conviction. It has been said that tears cleanse the soul, as the water of baptism purifies the body. Sorrow implies a degree of understanding, a reaching out of life to share the experience of life. When grief comes to the spiritually dedicated, there comes with it the comforter. The pain softens, the heart grows a little weary of its sorrow, and after the emotions have expended themselves, there is a strange, deep, quiet silence. It is in this silence that consolation from God is known and accepted. For us, then, living as we do in a world of small and intense personal allegiances, emotional pain brings with it an enlargement of our natures, by which we come nearer to the fountain of our soul's strength. This is a blessed mystery, even though we must come to it by sadness. The Beatitudes then continue. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. This is almost a direct quotation from Psalms 37:11. But the meek shall inherit the earth, and shall delight themselves in the abundance of peace. God's meek are the lowly, who by their very estates have not known intense pride or ambition. They have felt content in simple things and are glad for the privileges of labor and rest. We seldom hear from them, for they do not emerge as individuals, but from a deep, broad stratum, which sustains upon itself the shifting surfaces of social and political policies. These meek always seem to be the victims of the pressures of the selfish and the willful. Yet of all parts of our complicated culture, they come the nearest of living the faith of their fathers. They are law-abiding and God-loving. Their visions may be limited, their minds unlearned, and their manners deficient in polish. But they keep the faith, and in moments of emergency they preserve the nation. When the great struggle of strong men is finished, and the world is weary of its own vanity, the meek shall remain. They shall inherit the battlefield, and they will plow it and restore it to serve the living. Agitators cannot touch the depths of that great body of human beings, which can neither be tempted, nor bribed, nor threatened. God's meek also include those who have returned out of the illusion of materialism, like the prodigal son journeying back to his father's house. The truly wise, the surely strong, and the really good are always meek. Only the learned fully realize how little they know. Only those in high positions have experienced the vanity of power. With depth comes gentleness. And when we have found the source of our own security, our pride dissolves in humble gratitude. Those obsessed by the delusion of their own importance finally destroy themselves and others of their kind. As General Wolfe said, as he stood below the walls of Quebec, the path of glory leads but to the grave. There shall be wars and rumors of wars and great changes upon the earth. Civilizations shall lock themselves in desperate struggles over territories and ideologies. But in the end, God's meek, victims of countless incivilities, shall inherit the kingdom. The mystics have always been included among the meek of God, regardless of their stations or their attainments. They have cultivated quite in simple ways. They have been content to keep the faith in their hearts and serve their fellow men without hope of recognition or reward. Even helpfulness can be selfish, and there can be a strange quality of arrogance concealed beneath what appears to be humility. Once, however, there has been a complete dedication in the heart to God's will. There can be no hypocrisy in conduct. Those truly humble are honorable and devout persons. They are practicing the fruits of inner experience, where there is no ulterior motive, no reservation in the heart or mind, but a complete and selfless devotion to truth. There should be no criticism. Today we expect hypocrisy, for many evil deeds are concealed behind the appearances of kindly gestures. We try to see in mysticism some subtle means of satisfying selfishness or egotism. Believing that men are by nature evil, we demand that this evil expose itself, and we willfully misinterpret the simple virtues of others. This is unfair to them, and even more unfair to our own hearts and minds. The meek should not be interpreted as representing some downtrodden social class or some underprivileged group in the modern pattern of living. The meek are not those who, having little, desire much, but those in whom there is a contentment of spirit regardless of material estate. There is no virtue in living humbly by necessity, but there is great virtue in living modestly by choice. The Essenes were such a community of gentle people. They were remembered because the quality of their conduct was wonderfully memorable. We know of nothing which they did that was particularly exceptional, but their entire code was generally exceptional. They sought to restore the dignity of man in nature by living as human beings should live, as comrades, friends, and brethren, by elevating these natural dignities, and by cultivating those natural virtues, they fulfilled the obligations of mankind. By freeing themselves from the will to conquer, they relieved the earth of a little of that selfishness with which mortals have chose to afflict their kind. Those who stand in the presence of the Spirit, being neither servile nor arrogant, but deeply humble and eternally grateful, are God's meek. The Master then declared, "Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled." Here again, the thought is derived from the Psalms of David. Psalms 15, 1 and 2 reads, Lord, who shall abide in thy tabernacle? Who shall dwell in thy holy hill? He that walketh uprightly, and worketh righteousness, and speaketh the truth in his heart. There are several references in the Old Testament to the gate of the Lord through which only the righteous can enter. The word righteousness conveys the meaning of complete integrity. It is a state of godliness, free from all guilt or wrong or sin. It carries the further implication of equity and prudence, and, most of all, the performance of action in complete accordance with moral and spiritual wisdom. It is therefore both a state or quality, and a kind of conduct or performance consistent with virtue. To hunger and thirst after righteousness is to consider the moral requirements of consciousness as equal to the physical requirements of the body. Without food and water, we perish physically, and without the quest for righteousness, the soul is without nutrition. When we are in need of food, we are guided in search of nourishment by pressure within ourselves, which we call instinct. The search for truth must be as natural and inevitable as the instinct for survival in the material world. It is not enough that we decide that learning is an ornament of the mind or gentleness an adornment of the heart. The divine source of ourselves is the very substance of existence and growth. Only when we long to return to the conscious at one-ment with God are we established in righteousness. To do good work, we must know what is good. To be virtuous, we must understand virtue. To be wise, we must appreciate the principle of wisdom, not with the mind alone, but with the instruments of the soul. Until the mystical experience unfolds the divine plan through ourselves, we cannot be wholly righteous. Jesus implied this when he told his disciples that only the Father is good. We increase in goodness as we increase in the presence of God. The state of righteousness is the condition of harmony, and this in turn bears witness to a perfect adjustment between the divine plan and the human purpose. We are only righteous when conflict between self-will and divine will has been overcome, and we live in a state of conscious obedience. In Isaiah 33, 15 and 16, the prophet declares, He that walketh righteously shall dwell on high. To walk means, in this sense, to proceed through life, to continue day by day, to follow in the path that leads to union with the divine nature. There is the sense of abidance or existence in a quality of inspired labor and dedication to the service of the universal plan. The mystical longing for the intimate realization of truth and love is confirmed by right action. Jesus then taught, Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. An old Jewish writing, the treatise Shabbat, seems to have influenced this beatitude. The treatise contains the following lines, Whosoever hath mercy on men, on him also hath God mercy. But he who showeth no mercy to men, neither to him will God show mercy. The word mercy is defined as forbearance under provocation or the compassionate treatment of an adversary. It is the disposition to forgive and, by extent, the impulse to assist the unfortunate. In mysticism, mercy is a manifestation of compassion and arises from a deep internal experience of human frailty, which is accepted without the reaction of offense. Divine mercy is called grace and originates in the divine love. It is natural and proper that love should impel clemency, not because it is required by the moral code, but is an inclination impelled by understanding. Normal human beings are naturally inclined to be considerate of each other. Superficial policies and artificial inducements may cause the mind and even the heart to nourish resentments. While we are critical and intolerant, we close our inner lives to the blessings of peace and love. The injury we do to another actually depletes our own moral resources. We are warned by the scriptures that the cultivation of virtues in order that we may appear to greater personal advantage among our associates is without merit. It is as difficult for the enlightened to hold a grudge as it is for the ignorant to dispose of one. Criticism originates in a nature itself confused and uncertain because of the conditioning pressures from our environment, which are stronger than the convictions of conscience. We are prone to criticize and condone on the slightest provocation. The habit of negative analysis dominates many lives. Once we have permitted suspicions and doubts to grow and flourish in our thinking processes, we find that they cater to our own negative instincts. It is easy to make ourselves miserable by interpreting the moods and actions of our friends and neighbors unkindly. We become censors over private and public morals, and before long we feel impaired to share our conclusions with those of like minds. The result is gossip and slander, which endanger reputations and injure both the guilty and the innocent. We often contact persons who have made careers out of defaming character. They seem to live only to share misery. Nature penalizes such misuse of functions and faculties, and the critic, in the end, suffers more than his victims. The natural tendency to be merciful is a wonderful cleansing agent. It increases optimism, protects happiness, overcomes doubt, and vanquishes fear. Our abilities, freed from their negative pursuits, are more available for constructive endeavor. Criticism is habit-forming, and if the tendency is tolerated, it increases rapidly until no part of life is safe from its insidious influence. From criticizing a few, we pass rapidly to that state of mind which condemns all. We will be better persons if we seek good with the same enthusiasm which we are resolved to fret out evil. Religion teaches men to love the good and to serve all who are striving after truth. That we shall fall short of perfection is taken for granted. We know how difficult it is to preserve inner integrity when adverse circumstances arise. It is easy to excuse and explain our own faults by the simple statement that the flesh is weak. Common sense should tell us that other human beings are likewise afflicted and are likely to make the same wrong decisions. If we really accept life loving and sympathetically, we shall expect no more of our friend or relative than we are able to practice in our own living. We free our temperaments from the habit of criticism by establishing personal consciousness on a higher level of values. We must outgrow immature habits, even as we seek maturity of mind and heart. The light of truth illuminates dark and confused ways and bestows a larger appreciation for sincere human effort, even if its effort is not always obviously sufficient. The physician comes not to the well, but to the sick. Man's need is man's opportunity. There would be little worthwhile to be done if each individual were completely adequate. We are gathered here with the privileges of serving, loving, and understanding each other. This requires some effort and a continued devotion, but we grow most rapidly as we give most abundantly of our own patience and affection. It is better to help than to hurt. It is wiser to accept the injuries than to return them in like measure. When the powers of the soul are strengthened and unfolded, we cannot be moved by the machinations of our enemies. It is our own weakness and not the strength of adversity that is our undoing. It is useless to blame others and criticize their conduct. We are responsible to ourselves for ourselves and no more. To abide in the grace of God is to dwell in the mercy of the Most High. We consider the act of mercy as an attribute of the divine nature. We ask to be forgiven of our shortcomings and fondly expect that our petition will be accepted. We approach divinity by becoming like in quality with the attributes of deity. If, therefore, we abide in the light of God's love, we manifest this love through our own labors and endeavors. We practice the ways of truth, and by doing so, experience the substance of truth. We can never really know that which is different from our own natures. Criticism is different from mercy and is less commendable. Therefore, criticism cannot know mercy or justify it, or even desire it. But the human soul, desirous of experiencing the mercy of God, is inspired to transmute censorship into compassion, and in this way becomes capable of experiencing the divine grace. This grace is blessedness of the Spirit, and they are blessed, indeed, who bless with their deeds. The next beatitude reads, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." Of all these beautiful declarations, this is the most completely mystical. It defines and describes the very substance of that spiritual conviction which has inspired devout men and women to depart from worldliness and cling to God. Purity is not only freedom from moral sin, but a state resulting from the transmutation of all ulterior motives. When there is no selfishness, no ambition, and no fear in the human heart, all of the outer works of men will be good. Sometimes the impurities in our motives are so subtle and intangible that they pass unrecognized. It may even happen that we consider certain faults to be virtues because of wrong ethical instructions. One of the reasons why so many modern intellectuals are restless and discontented is that they are afraid to face internal evaluation of conduct. We all know when our motives are corrupt, but are not always ready to admit the fact even privately. It seems easier to turn our attention to superficial interests and to ignore that which would otherwise plague conscience. In daily experience, hundreds of persons have come to me with their woes. Some have failed in business, others have failed in their homes. Still others have failed in health. It is interesting that we should say that a man fails in business rather than the business has failed man. Even in language, there are truths of common usage well worth nothing. Almost invariably, those who have cheated, betrayed, or exploited were the victims of their own ulterior motives. One victim of himself will say, "I tried to be happy and I am miserable." Another will explain, "I sacrificed everything for wealth and now I am poor and sick." So the story goes, and the unfortunates who bring them never recognize that as the motives are bent, so the results are inclined. Resolved to fulfill selfish purposes at all cost, the impure of heart find the cost greater than the reward. Many who believe themselves to be victims of the dishonesty of their fellow men are really victimized by their own cupidity. In nature, honest effort is rewarded according to ability. Slight endeavor brings slight gain, but this is not satisfactory to ambitious mortals. Given as little as they can, they seek to gain all, and finally lose everything. Purity is required as an experience of consciousness for those dedicated to religious mysticism. In Psalms 24:3 and 4, it is written, "Who shall ascend into the hill of the Lord, or who shall stand in his holy place? He that hath clean hands and a pure heart." Here the heart symbolizes the inner life and the hands, the outer works of man. The instruction given by the psalmist has only one possible interpretation. Many sects have emphasized different moral codes as being peculiarly acceptable to God. Some have believed that purity could be induced by asceticism, renunciation, and detachment from all worldly instincts and earthly possessions. Others more wisely have realized that virtue is a spiritual strength and must be developed by courageously meeting the difficulties of each passing day. Innocence may be the result of ignorance, but virtue is perfected through wisdom and understanding. We grow, not by avoiding evil, but by rising victoriously over the weakness of our flesh. Good works, even when impelled by conviction or conscience, cannot substitute for delinquencies in other parts of the personality. It is not uncommon to find an individual overworking a single virtue, hoping thereby to compensate for a dozen vices. By this procedure, we are likely to select our pattern of nobility from some department of our living which least interferes with our dominant intemperances. Even our repentancies are burdened with schemes, and simple, honorable action unselfishly motivated is comparatively rare. The pure in heart have chosen the path of faith, fully realizing the importance of their decision. They are resolved to think straight and to live straight. They know in their hearts that happiness, contentment, and security depend upon inner integrity. As Confucius said, "My doctrine is simple, but its application is not easy. The rules of living are few, and knowledge of them is available to all who seek. But only the one whose strength is great because his heart is pure can keep the law." The most controversial of the Beatitudes reads, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall see God." The line, "Love peace and seek it at any price," is attributed to the great rabbinical scholar Hillel. With conflict, the dominant keynote in modern human relationships, the peacemaker is given slight consideration. He may be branded politically as a pacifist or accused of cowardice. We have long held that it is proper to maintain belligerently and aggressively both our principles and our opinions. Failure to do so is diagnosed as deficiency of character. In spite of this, however, the long memory of the world still honors the men of peace and those kindly sages who courageously lived and died in defense of the right to be kind. The Beatitude tells us that those who make peace shall be given the inner power to know God. Much more seems to be implied. Often those who would bring peace to nations have not found repose within themselves. The strength of those who preach concord comes from the experience of stillness in the heart. Unless the interior faith is established in love, we can speak of peace, but we cannot reveal it or release it through the channels of our nature. It is a well-known fact, easily demonstrable, that tranquility of spirit enriches character and protects the mind in time of trouble. We will be healthier, happier, and more successful in all our undertakings if there is peace in our hearts. Living as we do in a social system, becoming more intense and confused every day, we are constantly tempted to become involved in the conflicts of those around us. We are expected to take sides, to defend and offend, to agree and debate, and most of all to appear appropriately disturbed. It is a social error to be composed when others are exhausting their resources in pointless agitation. To such contestants, the peacemaker is not blessed, for he reveals a measure of self-control, which is itself disquieting to the uncontrolled. Peacemaking is not a profession, it is an instinct, and only succeeds when it is sustained by other gentle and kindly traits of character, when calmness pervades the atmosphere, radiating from a relaxed, well-poised person. It is a force to be reckoned with. But when it is demanded or required by some moralizer who knows not whereof he speaks, it has no calming influence. We cannot think of peace without reflecting upon the ages. We devoutly desire that the spirit of concord will descend upon the nations and that they will perfect a plan for the arbitration of their differences. This plan also must come from within the leaders of countries. It cannot be bestowed or guaranteed by international law until the humanity in man triumphs over selfishness and ambition, and mortal hates are transmuted by the wisdom of experience into immortal love. This process cannot be hastened, but already there is evidence that the human soul, weary of discord, is laying the inner formation for the outer reformation of mankind. The dream of peace, the patient dedication to the work of peace, and the devout conviction that peace is attainable and shall be accomplished. These bear witness to the maturing of mankind. All that has been accomplished in this world has been made possible by dreams and by the patient labor which has built solid foundations under dreams. Each day a few of this earth's vast population feel a growth of peace within themselves. They begin to understand the dimensions of both the disaster and the remedy. Tranquility, by making possible a better way of life for individuals, reveals its larger purpose and the blessings of universal concord. Those who have found peace have experienced God in peace, even as the disciples received the gift of peace from Jesus. The Master then taught, "Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." In this declaration, those who have suffered at the hands of the ignorant and the selfish are given consolation in a materialistic world pattern. It is the fate of the gentle that they should suffer from the conspiracies of the cruel. It has been ever thus. We have persecuted the prophets and done evil to those who came to us in love. Fortunately, it is not necessary for the good man to be understood or appreciated. The mystic knows that the wonderful miracle which takes place within his nature more than compensates for the ingratitude of his fellow men. It is only when we try to live something which we have not actually known or experienced that we are left without the consolation of the Spirit. Faith must be complete or it cannot sustain us through years of tribulation. But if it is complete, the tribulation is of appearance rather than of substance. It may appear to others that we are sorely afflicted, because under like conditions they would have no security. When we live like the popular conceits, we are accepted by those around us as like themselves. This acceptance brings with it a measure of sympathy and forbearance. But to enjoy this kind of security, we must sacrifice the larger and more permanent values. If we choose to follow the way of the Spirit, we depart from the approval of the majority of our contemporaries. We are no longer understood, but walk as strangers. Even our own families and the friends of a lifetime cannot bridge the interval which separates purpose living from a purposeless existence. We all misunderstand that which we do not understand. We are unwilling to accept a mystery, but must solve it according to the knowledge available to us. We see a friend departing from ways of easy living into what appears, by our estimation, to be a fruitless striving after unattainables. He seems to be more and more alone, and we give thanks that we are still part of the herd and can share both its fortunes and misfortunes. If we observe that the true seeker is sacrificing his economic security or is contenting himself with few possessions, we feel that he is foolishly depriving his nature of such luxuries as most of us accept as necessities. Ultimately, it seems to us that the devout mystic brings down upon himself the antagonism of public opinion. He is ostracized, publicly censored, and privately ridiculed. And as a proof that he is wasting his life, we point to his diminishing goods and growing indifference to the psychosis of success. If such a one had lived in earlier times, he might have been a martyr to the whims of some despotic prince or the irritated clergy. But now he is exposed only in the arena of public opinion, where his devotion to principles amuses the thoughtless. Seen from the outside, the mystic is an unfortunate enthusiast, more to be pitied than to be blamed. The worldly wise give thanks that they have escaped a similar destiny, and continue in such complacency as they are able to maintain. As the mystic advances on his own course, however, he passes the small reactionary sphere into an even larger universe. Light increases within him, and it would not be proper to say that he suffers a sense of loss or deprivation. He experiences rather a constant realization of gain. He becomes more even as he seems to possess less. He is exchanging an old way of life, walked in darkness, for a new way of life, walked in light. The presence of God, the increasing awareness of the wonders of the divine nature, and the blessed consolation of the Spirit reward him for renouncing conflict and death. The one sorrow of those who are great of vision is that they cannot share what they have experienced with those they love. Each must grow for himself, and we cannot bestow maturity of soul any more than we can force the maturity of body. The mystic is always a teacher by both word and example, but he learns what Jesus knew, that the world still rejects the man of soul and glorifies the man of body. But there are always a few in whose hearts the seeds fall upon the good ground. Mystics have exercised a greater influence than they knew. So hunger seeks its own nutrition and finds as much as it can take in the lives and words of the world teachers and prophets. The last of the Beatitudes extends this concept and explains the inner mystery. Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, and say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so persecuted they the prophets that come before you. We must understand heaven not as a future state, but as used in this text, it signifies the inner life in God. Heaven is the quietude of the spirit, the abode of internal peace, the rest that comes to the soul after it has accepted the way of righteousness. The man of soul, who's the personification of the enlightened conviction of consciousness, confronts the mind and the heart and prepares them to receive the disdain of mortals. If we are to be true to the divine power within us, we must endure all things for its sake. We must also, however, accept persecution with love, false witness with humility, and all indignities with gentleness of heart. We receive these revilings without complaint because we are in the service of that which is older than the world, and which will endure when time is no more. We have chosen, and there is no regret. We have found a work worthy of our talent and a dream that consoles the spirit. It is enough that we are good and faithful servants of that eternal plan that must ultimately succeed when the works of selfishness and ambition have failed. The internal mystery of the Christian faith is the presence of the Master as the real, though invisible power. We accept his authority and become citizens of his kingdom. We live according to his laws and keep his commandments, and we are not afraid. The best part of ourselves has found its destiny and has returned home from exile in a world of form. There is nothing that the dedicated heart is not ever ready to accomplish in the name of the keeping of the light. The labyrinth shines in the sky above the mortal battlefield. By this sign, the aspiring soul conquers the ages and becomes one with truth. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Rosies. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.